All you touch and all you see is all your life will ever be.
I'm a 26-year-old student, going to university studying veterinarian medicine. I was struggling financially, and when COVID-19 hit my country, I decided that I needed to find a job. I got a job in a nursing home. I do the night shift from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. When I first started, I didn't notice anything strange. But as time goes by, I'm feeling more and more uneasy. The first thing I noticed was the hand dryers in the common bathrooms going off for no reason. Only for a few seconds, 2 to 3 seconds tops. I thought, okay, that's weird, but oh well. The next thing that happened directly to me was really terrifying. I was downstairs, and the hand dryer from downstairs is the most active one. I just want to add, this is a 150-year-old institution, and there are 3 floors. So I was there alone, and had my phone in my jacket pocket. I was walking around, going to the coffee machine, and all of a sudden, my phone gets yanked out of my pocket and smashes against the floor. I pick it up and noped out of there. The screen was broken. Also, once in a while, one of the emergency bells, the ones the elders press when in trouble in the bathroom, goes off, and we panic because it's a really loud ring, and different from the ones in the rooms. It usually means that someone is in trouble in the bathroom, usually if they fall on the floor or something. So we rush there all the time, and there is no one in the bathroom. One night I was dozing off to sleep for a while, and I opened my eyes and saw a dark, male figure sitting in the room across from me, just watching me. I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me and closed my eyes and fell asleep. This one happened yesterday night, the most terrifying so far. I was feeling tired, so I went to the room next to the nurse's office. There are some long chairs there, so I thought I was going to lay down for a little bit. When I got there, I felt uneasy, like someone was watching me. But I thought, hey, stop being crazy, it's all in your head. I dozed off to sleep, a very light sleep. 20 minutes in, I woke up to the chair shaking uncontrollably. I got up and fell. I thought it was an earthquake. I ran to the other room where my colleagues were and asked, "Did you feel the earth shaking?" They were all confused and said, "No, you were probably dreaming," and laughed it off. But I know what I felt, and it terrifies me. I have heard plenty of stories of people who have predicted their death. Now it's my turn to share some death predictions I have heard that came true. I work as the lead social worker in a nursing home. Now, there's nothing inherently scary about working in a nursing home, or just nursing homes in general, other than the occasional horrendous smell that will knock your socks off. But in the time I have been working as the head social worker at my nursing facility, I've had 2 residents predict their own death. One of them isn't terribly creepy, mainly just sad. The other one gives me the creeps. We will start with the not terribly creepy one. This particular resident had been there for a bit, and they were there for long-term care. They were fairly young, below the age of 60. They were there because their medical issues made it difficult for them to live independently. I started being their social worker during the COVID-19 pandemic, and at the time of this incident, it was around December 2020, getting close to Christmas. The resident was in fairly stable condition, no major health problems that were going to cause imminent death. By all means, they would have lived a lot longer had it not been the circumstances around their death. But I will not provide detailed information on what happened. One day I was chatting with the resident when they asked if they could go home to visit their family for the holidays. With the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, It was policy that residents could not go on outings for the potentiality they would come back and cause an outbreak. So, sadly, I had to tell the resident no, they could not go home for the holidays. The resident began to sob, and I did my best to comfort them. I enlisted the help of the director of nursing to try and settle them. As we were talking to the sobbing resident, the resident confided that they were utterly sure they would not live to see the next Christmas. We did our best to reassure the resident that they were in stable condition and that there was nothing wrong that would cause them to die within the next year. But unfortunately, due to a lot of sudden and conflicting factors, the resident passed 2 weeks later. Now the second story. This resident was probably somewhere in their 60s. Resident had numerous health issues, but since we were providing nursing care and rehabilitation, it was assumed that they would get to go home with their spouse. One day, while chatting with a nurse in the residence hall, I heard the resident cry out. I walked over to their room, and they were in the fetal position on their bed, with a look of utter terror and dread on their face. I immediately asked what was wrong, if I needed to fetch the nurse. The resident looked at me and said there were people just outside the door, talking about how the resident was going to die soon, and how they were going to dig the resident's grave. I attempted to reassure the resident that no one was talking about the resident dying. There was no one there talking about digging the resident's grave. I had just been fairly close to the room, and the conversation between the nurse and I had nothing to do with the resident, let alone dying and digging their grave. The resident seemed to calm down a bit, and things proceeded as normal. But just days later, the resident was transferred to the hospital where they died shortly after. It still haunts me. What entities were outside that resident's door, discussing the resident's death, days before it occurred? My mum has worked in the same nursing home for the past 20 years and has had a few experiences. One, so the home has 2 floors, a basement and an attic. Long hallways connect to the residents' rooms, sharply branching left and right at the end, and at the other end is the kitchen and dining room. For reference, at the end of the hallway to the right is storage and cleaning supplies. No resident rooms on that side. One night, my mum was working late and had to go get something from the supply closet. She turned the corner from the kitchen to head up the long hallway. She has MS, so has to be careful walking, so tends to look at the floor while doing so. As she's walking, she glances up and sees what looks like the bottom of an old red Victorian dress go around the corner to the right, near the floor rather quick. Obviously, sometimes residents can wander at night, but none could turn around the corner that quickly. So she continues because you never know. Lo and behold, no one was there, and the only 3 doors down there are still locked. I don't think she got the supplies she needed and noped out of there. 2. It was Christmas time, and my mum was to go up to the attic and get the Christmas napkins, etc. None of the staff like going up there because there's always been an eerie feeling and they usually go up in pairs. My mum took me up when I was a teenager, and it definitely has a creepy vibe, but for whatever reason, she had to go up there by herself this time. As you can imagine, the attic is rather large. At the opposite end from the elevators, where all the junk they don't use gets put, and no one really goes that far over. So my mum's been up there for about 5 minutes, gathering whatever, when she hears a rustling from behind her. She stops and pays attention for a second, when all of a sudden there's a loud bang from behind the junk, with no explanation. Again, she was out of there. 3. I don't know how much of a coincidence this is, but when the residents pass away, it's always in 3s. Like one will pass and everyone is like, oh no, 2 more are gonna go. And they always do. Then no one will die for weeks or months. Then as soon as one passes, so do another 2. It's really strange. And 4, the usual hearing footsteps behind her, turning around and no one's there. This happens a lot. My mum tells me most of the staff have had some weird experiences, but I don't know their stories. Has anyone else heard of this with the residents passing in threes? Would really like to know if anyone else has experienced this. I started my job as a healthcare assistant in a nursing home in 2019. The home used to be an old orphanage, which explained the noises of children laughing and crying, and also the noise of balls bouncing and little footsteps. There are 4 floors in a nursing home, and on each floor, the staff and most residents working on these floors would often see the lady in white or a woman in black. The staff have their own stories about their experiences with these entities, but this was mine. One particular shift, I started my day with the usual routine, coffee, and made my way to start with the first room. As I was walking into the room, I had seen a woman dressed in a long, black, old-fashioned dress slowly come out of the room next door. I rubbed my eyes as my heart sank, and she was gone. I carried on with my usual routine, and the lady I was seeing to at the time said, "That woman has been in here again." I asked what woman she was talking about, knowing full well I had just seen her and that I was shitting myself. She then went on to tell me that when she comes, it's either me or one of my neighbors that have to go. I was scared, confused, and carried on asking her as many questions about this woman as I could. The lovely lady didn't speak for the rest of my time in her room. This was on my mind for the rest of my 12-hour shift. After knowing another resident had seen the woman in black, my heart sank even more. A constant anxiety I had returning to the building every next shift. Being on each unit, I learned that every unit had its own different entities. Shadow people walking along the wall, dark figures changing their appearances, the smell, the change in energy, the huge dark mists in residents' rooms that would stay in one spot. Not everyone saw as much as me, apart from the man under the bed. Me and another girl were doubling up together not so long ago and starting at one end of the corridor. The lady who we were seeing to was very quiet and barely spoke. We got to her room and noticed she was hissing, spitting and shouting, "Get out of here! Get out from behind the curtains!" Yes, the curtains were still closed as it was around 8 AM. It didn't look as if anything was behind them, but we reassured her as much as possible. By this point, she was very distressed. The girl I was working with was concerned she was hallucinating until the lady told us he was under the bed. We had pulled the bed out as one of us works on each side of the bed as the lady is cared for in bed. After trying to take her mind off things by changing conversation and talking about things she once enjoyed, this quiet little old lady was having none of it. She kept reminding us that he is under the bed. So after almost finishing up in her room, we pushed the bed back and I began to collect clothes for laundry. Within seconds of me picking the clothes up and being ready to go on to the next room, the other girl who I was working with was pushed backwards onto the floor in full force, and I was kicked. I panicked and asked her what had happened. She screamed, "Something is actually under the bed." She stood up with tears running down her face with fear and repeated herself again. Once I managed to calm her down and asked her what had happened and if she had seen anything, she told me she felt 2 large hands push into her chest with so much force that, when she hit the floor, she could feel someone standing over her. She said she couldn't see anything but knew something was there. After having a lot of scary encounters and experiences within the home, I decided to ask the maintenance man, Len, who'd been working at the home for some time. I told him what I had seen and what's happened since me working there. I asked him firstly, what he thought about the woman in black. He began to laugh. He said, "So I take it you have seen her too?" He went on to tell me that the lady in white indeed does protect the children up on the top unit. He told me the children love to play until it's time to hide. He said the little girl, Mary, talks to him all the time and even follows him. She watches him do his jobs around the home. He said no one really talks to him while he's working but Mary, and the other children definitely keep him company. I asked him if the sounds of balls bouncing would be from the children playing. He said, "Of course, I'm the only one who brought them a ball." I didn't really know what to think or say. I was shocked, but also it was so sweet at the same time. Len told me the woman in black is indeed very evil and has workers within the home. She has taunted him many times. "She knows how much I love the children," he stated. "Although they aren't here in the physical world, I have no wife and no children. Me and the spirits both need friends." Len went on to tell me his story with the dark entities within the home. Len began to tell me his experiences with the lady in white, and his experience with the woman in black, and the other dark entities. I was so interested and wanted to hear everything. I asked Len if he could start from the beginning, so he did. The first dark encounter, as Len called it, he had been left some notes from the staff over the weekend about lights flickering and switching on and off. The same problem was happening in every other unit, barring the top floor. Len began looking into this straight away and started on the middle floor. He started in room 313 and wanted to make his way through the home into the other units. Len said as he walked into 313 and saw all the lights were on, he flicked the switches. Everything was fine. No tripping, no flickering. He said he waited around for a couple of minutes to see if he could see any other issues. Absolutely nothing. Len turned his back and began to head for the door. He said he automatically could feel as if he was being watched, but not being watched from behind, but as if someone was stood at the door blocking his way. Len stood still. He remembers the horrific smell that came over the room within seconds. It smelled like I was in the middle of an abandoned slaughterhouse. Len stood still and asked if there was anyone there with him. He expressed how he now felt there was hundreds of eyes on him and that he began to feel physically sick. Len ran out of 313 and never told anyone about it until he met me. "If there's one room I'm scared of, it's 313. I asked Len about his first time seeing the lady in white. Len began to smile and said, "After I ran from room 313. He said she comforted him at the perfect time. He told me after a while, once he began to feel better, he sat on the fire exit stairs outside of the top unit door. He saw a woman in a lovely white gown coming up the stairs. He said he stood up for her to pass, and before he knew it, she was stood in front of him, and he was stood in front of her. Her smile brightened my mood. Suddenly, I felt better." Len moved out of the way and let the lady pass, and he noticed she was floating rather than walking, and she disappeared through the door. And all of a sudden, I knew she wasn't here in the physical world, but I was no longer afraid. As he looked through the glass of the door the lady in white passed through, he said there was 5 little children beside her. And that's how I met my little Mary. Len and I spoke many more times about his experiences. The one he enjoyed speaking of most was how he met Mary. After first seeing the lady in white and the children, Len was no longer afraid of the home and the darkness that lies within it. He quoted, "In the darkest of places, the light will always find you." Len had noticed his tools would go missing while he was working on jobs, and then would return. Len began slowly to talk to the spirits of the children as he knew it would be them. He said he had a warm feeling and could feel them when he couldn't see them. Until he first saw Mary, he said he was sat in his office on the bottom unit. It was a normal day, Len said. The usual routine. My office door is always open while I'm in there, and from the corner of my eye, I could see a little person stood in the doorway. I turned my head and there was Mary, in her blue dress. Mary smiled at me and waved. I smiled back and asked her what she was doing down here. Mary said she was running and hiding from the other children. I told her my name, and she told me hers. I then said to Mary that she can hide in the office, but only when the door is open. The visits from Mary became more frequent, he said. I began to know her better and started to bring in old books from home into my office, and noticed she would take pencils from my office. So I knew I had to think of something better than books. That's when I bought the ball, he said whilst laughing. I know everyone thinks I'm a crazy old man in here, but I don't care. I can see a whole different world to many others. A world much more beautiful. I found out Len moved his books and toys he had bought for the children into the attic as it's empty and very big. And that's where they are most of the time. Len didn't want anyone moving or touching what's there for the children. Before I finish this, I must tell you that the children's favorite song sang by Len is "You Are My Sunshine." Thank you for listening.
Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching. As always, a big thank you to all of the Reddit users who kindly allowed me to use their stories. If you want to help support this channel, you will find links to both my Patreon and my Teespring store in the description below. So feel free to have a look. And the biggest thank you to all of you who continue to support me. I truly do appreciate it. And remember,
Papa loves you.